Well, hello again. Time for another one of those stories. I've said for years, you never know what's going to come through the door of this shop. It can always be a surprise. So the story here is a new customer found me online. Wanted to bring a guitar in for me to work on. I asked him what he had, and he said, well, it's just one of those old Gibsons I want to get fixed up. His plan was he wanted to get it straightened up and make it playable again so that I believe his 10-year-old grandson could learn to play, because he was expressing an interest. So he shows up with this, and I see the gig bag, and I'm thinking, okay, well, we've got an old LG1, maybe a J45 if we're lucky. We'll see what we've got. So he lays it on the counter for me to check it out, and I open up the bag. So this is what I see. Well, boys and girls, this ain't no acoustic. And of all things, he has it in a gig bag. Let me point out right now, before I forget it, the only thing I probably hate more than a gig bag for damages is a guitar stand. So, now that that's been said, we'll move on. So I open up this bag and I look at this and my heart starts pounding. I start getting a little sweaty in the palms. Anybody have any idea what we've got? Any guesses? Here's a hint. Let's go up here. Let's look at the headstock. Okay? Any takers? I'm going to tell you it's a tough one. Fooled me for a while. Let's go over here on the bench, get a look at this. Okay. First off, what we have... Oh, be still my heart. Anyway. First of all, nothing gets me worked up quicker than a big old hunk of mahogany and two P90s. The only thing that can make this guitar perfect would be having a wraparound bridge tailpiece. So, okay, now I'm done with that. Compose myself a bit here and move on. So, we have, as we say, two P90s. We have an SG red finish. Now, I happen to know that there was several guitars that left the factory with original red finishes like this in '58. Okay, so that was in the back of my mind. But the more I look at this guitar, we got some funny stuff going on. Lots of weird stuff. We have the dropped logo. We have a 50s truss rod cover. We have 50s bushings on the tuners. We have 60s tuners. Oop, hang on. Okay, so back to where we were. That was a priority mail delivery for some parts that I need this afternoon, so that was cool. Luckily, I didn't have my hand up in a guitar gluing something important. Anyway, where were we? Okay, we got the dropped logo. We have no Les Paul logo. We have a tapered headstock. Okay. Now, the tapered headstock, the dropped logo, tells me 55 or earlier. Alright, keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that we don't have any Les Paul logo right here. And if we flip it over, we do not have a serial number. None. Gone. Alright? Trying to handle this thing pretty carefully. It's worth a few bucks. So, anyway. So, let's move on back down to this end. And for those that didn't notice that, see my arm? No blue shirt. Okay, different day. I do own more than one shirt. Okay, we've got 60s knobs. I dated the pots. The pots are actually dated 63s. It has the Black Beauty capacitors on the tone controls. We have his original bridge that I was going to use, but it's bent. Someone at some point, probably when the pots and stuff were changed, which we'll get into that in a few, put nylon saddles in the bridge, which is common at that time too. We do still have the original aluminum tailpiece. That's very cool. Here's something cool. The switch knob. Man, guys pay big bucks for that. Look how yellowed that knob is. That's original. Someone has filed the pickup covers. Of course, the covers are warped and stuff anyway, so they're gonna be changed. We're gonna save the originals for him. Everything original off this guitar we're going to save for him in a bag. The frets have been chopped down severely. It's got a really bad mow down job on the frets. We've got some loose inlays that we're going to have to take care of. In fact, most of the inlays on this guitar have shrunken, and they're going to have to come out and be re-glued. So we're going to have to refret it, redo the inlays. It's going to get a new nut. It's going to get new pickup covers. We've been working on getting a custom pickguard made for it here in the States. That the guy has the correct plastic. And we will also be getting a set of pickup covers from him so that they're collar correct and not pink like a lot of them are, or peach colored rather. So we flip this over. Something else I didn't mention to you was the neck has already been carved down also to 60 specs. And something that I didn't let myself notice because I was too busy being involved in the guitar, if I had noticed the brown back plates, those were a dead giveaway. Okay, anybody on board with this right now? Ready to find out what it is? I searched and searched trying to figure out what this guitar was. So my good buddy Carson came down one night armed with a armful of information and reference materials. So we jumped on this guitar with screwdrivers, a black light, a tack light, an optivisor, and like I say, a stack of reference materials. And what we've nailed it down to is this. This guitar went back to Gibson in the early 60s. It is at least a 55 or early 56 because it has the tunematic bridge and tailpiece. It has the offset seam in the top. That's the only seam in the top. It doesn't go down the center. It's offset to the side like a lot of the early 50s stuff. We've already discussed the headstock and logo. So what they've done is when this guitar went back to the factory, they recarved the neck and refinished it and put new pots and electronics in it and new tuners. We found around the edge of the binding here a tiny little bit of gold they left. There's some flecks here that we thought were blisters under the finish that are actually gold. And we found a tiny little bit of gold in the corners of the pickup cavities. They did a really good job cleaning this guitar up. Now that explains the lack of the serial number, because by the time this guitar was done they were no longer stamping the ink serial numbers. So the serial number was removed when it was refinished. Also at that point they weren't making a Les Paul. They were making SG guitars at that point. The 60 to 61 Les Paul style SGs had been yanked from the catalog because Les Paul had pulled his endorsement. So that again explains why we have no logo up here. So the owner tells me that his brother acquired this guitar in the mid-60s used from a pawn shop. They were in service. Him and a friend were in service together. His friend was shipping out. He gave him a pawn ticket to pick up the guitar, and if he picked it up, he could have it. So that's how he acquired this in the mid-60s in this condition. So, there's the story. Mystery solved. It has been a gold top, like I say, a 55 or 56. They were sent back to the factory, had the neck carved to 60 specs, and was refinished. So there you go. So I'm going to jump on this guitar. We've got to pull the frets, got to reglue some inlays. We're going to restore this guitar back as well as we can to original specs with a custom red finish from the factory. It's still a very cool guitar. Value is still very good on it, although that wasn't the reason it was brought in, but I think we've changed his mind now. And I can certainly bet that when he picks it up, he's going to have a case for it. So we'll continue on with this, and I'll catch you up on the progress later. Okay, so I thought I'd catch you up on what's going on here. We've started working on this Les Paul. We have the nut out, we have the frets out. I mentioned earlier that inlays were curled and loose and are going to be reglued. We've started doing that. I have the first two inlays glued in. The third one is clamped. I've had to take them all out very carefully. They've all been curled. The celluloid curl is pretty bad from age. Give you an idea of what's going on here. Here's the last one. You see how it's curled? What I'm having to do is, like I say, pull these out very carefully. Clean up underneath them, clean up the back of them. Scrape the old glue off. Clean them up, good to be reglued. Then what I'm doing is actually carefully heating these and pressing them to make them flat again. In fact, what I'm doing is putting a 12-inch radius on them. That way I'm sure the ends will be held down okay, and we can go from there. So this is going to take a little bit of time to get these inlays all taken care of. It seems to be going really well. They're leveling up pretty well. So far, I'm not having to take any material off the inlays. They're leveling up really well at the top of the fingerboard. That's what we want because these inlays are pretty thin anyway. Truing this fingerboard up, I'm going to have to be careful. I don't want to do any more sanding than I have to, so I'm going to have to pull a few tricks out of my hat doing this refret. But we'll see what we can do. So, moving along. Well, here we are. We have our Les Paul on the neck jig. This is one of those reasons I really appreciate the neck jig. I was hoping to get by with this fingerboard without doing a whole lot of work on it. Like I said, I didn't want to sand more off than I had to, but we found out pretty quick. We've got a bad spot up here. We've got a really bad spot right through here. And we've got a high spot up here. I'm almost betting this problem right here is why the original frets were cut down so low. We have a huge hump right here. So we're going to try to clean up what we can here. I'm not going to true this fingerboard up as much as I usually would. I'm going to do some special tricks with the frets to try to keep from having to sand the neck any more than necessary. Well, it's been a few hours. In fact, it's the next day. We have our frets all in, trimmed and beveled, rough leveled. We're all jigged back up here. We're going to do the fret dress now. The refret on this guitar I actually did with a slightly taller wire just to give me some more room for leveling, to make up for not being able to actually true the fingerboard up as much as I would like to. Like I say, this neck is still very thin at this point. I don't want to remove any more material than necessary. When it went back to the factory, it did get, like I say, the 60s taper neck recarve, so it's a little thinner. The fingerboard actually leveled out pretty well, not as bad as I thought it was going to be. We're going to have to, like I say, take up a little bit of slack with the frets. So I'm using a 55 thousandths tall fret wire that's going to give me some room to take off a little bit of extra material and still keep the standard size height when we're done. And I also must say at this point that the refret I did was actually a vintage style refret. I pressed the frets in and tapped them in. I didn't want to do my traditional modern refret because I did not want the vintage police busting me on this. So for all you guys that's all concerned, we did not mess with the ecosystem of the guitar. It's all still intact. It is done pretty much the way Gibson would have done it back in the 50s. So you can relax on that point. So I'm going to move on and get this fret dress done. I'm going to be spending probably all day on this guitar again today. We have to do the fret dress. I have to make a nylon nut for it. So that's before we even start cleaning the guitar up and doing a few other things. Catch up later. Okay, we've got a few more hours in. The fret job is finished. The inlays come out looking amazingly good. It's very nice to be able to work in a Brazilian rosewood medium. Don't get a chance to do that very often. Something that pretty much is no more. Man, that's a nice looking piece of rosewood. Okay, we're moving on. We've got to get our nut made. Now I have one of my own little nut blanks right here waiting. So let's get on that. Okay, I thought I'd get back to you here with a little quick catch up on what we've been doing. As you can see, we have the pickup covers and the pickups reinstalled on this guitar. That is another story on its own. P90s come in a couple different sizes, so depending on the vintage, you have to trim the rings. So I cut down the pickup rings, the covers actually, with an X-Acto razor saw. Cut them down just enough to fit properly. I didn't cut them down anyways like the original ones were. You can see here, this one was cut really thin, the front one. We still have a few finished touch-ups going on here. A couple of these have come out really well. We've got a couple more here to finish up. The top's all been cleaned up. It's starting to look pretty good. The output jack plate has been replaced. And you can see where I had to plug the holes for it. That was pretty ugly. Actually, the camera picks it up a little worse than it actually looks. They don't look really that bad, but I guess the camera wants to make it look worse. Okay, whatever. So anyway, for what you may have not caught at the beginning, this had been on the guitar at some time in its colorful life as a jack plate. Okay, let's go up here and check out the headstock. If you remember, there was a big chip out right here. Well, that's not anymore. It's gone. Touched up a couple of corners here a little bit. The tuning machines have cleaned up really well. This was the bent one. I don't think anybody will ever notice. They've been cleaned up, re-lubed, so they're all in very good shape. Got a couple touch-ups still going on back here. But we're getting down the road on this job. This has actually been a very pet project of mine. And this is one of those things that makes it worth coming to work sometimes. So some days when you're dealing with a lot of nonsense, what I've been doing is at the end of the day spending about an hour and a half on this guitar just to kind of chill a little bit and enjoy what I'm doing some. So when I get back to you, this guitar will probably be finished. As promised, here we are with the finished guitar. As it turns out, we've got a bit over 15 hours in this job, which actually not too bad. We've got a very well cleaned up guitar. We have a new pick guard, pickup covers, which, by the way, I have to give kudos to Cream Tone Vintage Design Parts. Lonnie went out of his way to actually make sure we had a proper pick guard for this. Very briefly, there was about a month worth of emails back and forth between us with templates and corrections and so on to try to get the finished product of this pick guard right. These three that I have here is just what I have on hand. There was a lot that was discarded along the way, so I bet there was probably 12 or more emails between us about this pick guard. So again, I thank him for his patience for getting us something that's actually absolutely correct with the gaps that the originals would have had and everything. The offset screw hole up here. It took us a little bit of work to get it right, but it's done now, and we can be happy about it. We have a new bridge. I actually repaired the original toggle switch. It had been kind of knocked apart, and I was able to salvage and restore it, so we've actually got the original toggle switch there. Again, our fingerboard inlays I think come out really well. We've got our old rolled 50s truss rod cover. Our touch-ups here, this big chunk that was missing here has come out really well. The chunks missing back here have done pretty well. So we've got the whole body cleaned up. It's actually quite shiny. There was a lot of crud that had to be removed from this guitar. I've probably spent close to, I would say maybe 3 hours just cleaning this guitar and polishing it by hand. I don't use buffers on stuff like this. It just gets you into trouble. One slip and you're in trouble. So enough said. I do everything by hand like that. The P90s, really good story there. Once I got them all adjusted up, I found something out that really kind of I get a chuckle out of. And a lot of these old guitars, a lot of you may not realize, the pickups are actually wired out of phase. I believe it was probably an accident at the time, or they didn't really know any better. But these guitars by default in the middle position will give you that incredible old BB or Freddie King tone, and this one's got it. I'm not going to play it for you, but believe me, I had it plugged in a while ago for a little while, and I was having a great time. So there we go with that. So here we have this guitar. It's had quite a life. I'm sure that if it could actually tell me more of its story, there'd be more to know. Only thing that I know is what I have found out and what I've been told. That's one of the things about really cool old guitars. They're like people. They have lives. They've been through a lot. And something that I like to take into consideration was a friend of mine made a comment one time that was talking about houses that he owned. And the whole thing goes along with whether it's guitars, houses, hearts, whatever. Nothing is really a possession. You don't really own anything. You're basically just a caretaker of it for a time being, and if you're lucky, you get to share some time and space. So that brings me to the point where I'm really kind of happy that I was given the opportunity to bring this guitar back for more time in its life that's already had. If we're really lucky, this guitar may see another 50 years of use, and I can be proud of that. So, till next time, play nice, be cool. I hope you've enjoyed.